The opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Eastlink Community TV, its sponsors, or partners.
Okay, everyone, so we're gonna start. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this panel on being Black in Atlantic Canada. We're gonna get some perspectives from our amazing panelists. My name is Leandra Bauman, and I am the president of the Dalhousie Black Law Students Association, and I'm joined by two lawyers and one soon-to-be lawyer who will give you their insights. So I'll start in reverse order of seniority with the introductions. Javon, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
For sure. Oh. For sure. So I grew up in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. I did my undergrad at St. Mary's doing a criminology and psychology, and then I later went to Dalhousie to study law. I just graduated in May, and now I'm currently articling at Stuart McKelvey here in Halifax.
Hi, my name is Amaki Otute. I'm from Fredericton, New Brunswick. I was born and raised in Fredericton. I did my undergrad at University of New Brunswick in finance and economics, and then I went on to do my JD at UNB as well. I articled in Fredericton before moving to Toronto in 2018 to pursue securities law, and now I'm currently legal counsel at the Ontario Securities Commission.
And good morning, I am Falami Jones. I am also African Nova Scotian. My community hails from Truro, the Marsh, because there are 3 communities there, so my dad would be upset if I didn't say which community I'm from. I'm the Marsh, I'm from the Marsh. I did my undergrad in Toronto at Ryerson in midwifery, and then I came back home here and did a master's in education at the Mount, and then lost my mind and decided to go to law school at Dalhousie. And so I articled with McGinnis Cooper, and I am practicing in wills and estates. That's me. Oh, we'll go this way.
So great diversity of practices there, and also representation from the 2 law schools in the Atlantic. So lovely. So I guess starting off with the questions, I just wanted to address like some experiences, some stories that I think a lot of us have heard about being a Black lawyer in the Atlantic, and some of the challenges that we can potentially face, and whether those experiences kind of ring true for you or whether you think things are changing. So starting with one story that I feel I've often heard is that Black lawyers often end up leaving Atlantic provinces to go elsewhere because they feel there are better opportunities, or maybe they don't experience the same forms of discrimination as they do in their home provinces. So I was just wondering if that is true to your experience or things that you've heard, or if there are any changes or evolutions that you've seen. Do you want to start, Flami?
Sure. I mean, I haven't practiced in Ontario. It'd be interesting to hear your perspective in terms of leaving. But, I mean, let's be real. Like, racism can be felt individually, but it's also systemic. It's institutional. There is no corporate space that is immune to that, including my firm. I think, you know, are there times when I have concerns that maybe if I'm meeting a client, are they going to judge me differently? Sure, that's very real. Do they struggle sometimes with saying my name? Definitely. You know, do you get the same work all the time? I think that that's part of the conversation with racialized people as a whole, and there's, you know, lots of conversation and ensuring, for example, as you go through your articles, that you're getting good work and meaningful work. Are the changes happening? Yes, I think that's where our leadership within our firms really needs to be accountable, have action plans in place, and ways to sort of assess and retain people. But for me, working from home is a game changer, and I think your next questions will sort of pull some of that out, but I'd be interested to hear what others think in terms of their experience.
Thank you. So, yeah, I guess that is a common story, and it's my story in particular. So I went to school in New Brunswick and then Fredericton, and then after articling, I left and I went to Toronto. My reason for leaving, though, was more so because of the area of law I wanted to practice. So I practice in securities law, and that's not very common practice area in Atlantic Canada, so I knew I had to leave, and Toronto is a place for me to do that. In terms of discrimination or racism or unconscious bias, that's going to be anywhere you go. It might not be as overt in places like Toronto, where it's very diverse and people are accustomed to working with different races and ethnicities, whereas in Fredericton there's a sprinkle of Black people, so you are the only one pretty much everywhere you go. So that has been a nice change for me, and I definitely value that, having moved away. But I think it definitely is changing, and hopefully more changes are to come too.
Yeah, so as I said, I grew up in Bridgewater, so I'm very accustomed to Nova Scotian lifestyle. But going through law school, you reach the 2L stage, and OCIs are around the horizon. And of course, it was a thought of mine to go outwards, explore a little bit, see what I'm interested in. So along with the kind of factors of like discrimination and racism, it's a holistic assessment. And I feel like for me individually, I thought it would be a good idea. COVID happened, everything happened. I have elderly family. I thought I wanted to be close with them throughout their lives. So that was part of my decision, but overall, I'd say, I don't know, it's definitely a story that is told. You hear about the experiences. It might be because they have a bigger bar in Ontario, lots of more people, lots of diversity, but it's definitely something that's always talked about in law school, is in your mind, and there's kind of the impression that if you stay in Nova Scotia, you won't have as many opportunities, or you won't make as much money. You might not work as many hours, whatever. But you hear those stories, and those are kind of things that reinforce your decision, whether consciously or unconsciously, yeah.
But we're glad to have you guys here, some of them part-time, nevertheless. So yeah, I guess it's always nuanced, is what I'm taking away from this. And as you mentioned, Amaki, that there's going to be those experiences everywhere, but maybe less overt in some places, and even within that, it's changing. So I guess another experience, and maybe one that you can speak to too, first, given your experience now in government or like a public institution, is something else that I've heard often in Nova Scotia, at least, is that sometimes Black lawyers can have better experiences in government, or at least more opportunity versus private practice. And then for those of you who do practice in private practice, do you think there are changes in the culture that are happening, and what would you like to see?
So I guess I kind of had the opposite experience. So when I applied for my summer position and articling positions, I applied to government as well as private practice, and I actually wasn't considered by government roles, but I was considered by a few private practice roles, and so I can't say that they weren't open to me, because they did take me on. Where I actually experienced, I guess, not being open was from the students that I was picked over. So they had an issue that I was picked for the private practice positions over them. So I can't say it was the law firms that weren't open to me, because they did take me on, but yeah, the experience was that the government overlooked me as opposed to the private firms.
Interesting. I think there's some truth in what you're saying in terms of corporate practice. Again, that history is very real. We'd be lying if we said otherwise. When I applied to my firm at McGinnis Cooper, who's doing some great work, but I'll start from when I applied, in my 1L position, there were 2 other Black lawyers practicing in the whole firm as associates. There's still no partners. But if we look across Atlantic Canada at the larger corporate firms, there's very few Black partners as well. So it's something that the culture as a whole has to change. Now, with that said, I would say, and anybody that knows me, if you push from the bottom up, right? That's where the change happens. And so I can say McGuinness Cooper is at least conscious and aware of the fact that there is a significant problem, one, with the Justice Institute as a whole, but the corporate culture and anti-Black racism. And so over the time, now this is a few years, that's changing. And I'm happy to say that now there's 4 practicing Black lawyers and more Black students coming through. And, you know, to be honest, like, when you see somebody at a firm, I remember when I was looking for firms to apply to, and I would kind of scroll through the websites, and maybe all of you did that, right? And you're looking to see, like, how many of us are in there? And then you apply to the ones that you think that you can see yourself in, right? And so I think when that changes, we'll start to see difference in corporate firms, but it needs to come from the management and leadership. And so we need more Black lawyers as partners and in those managerial roles to ensure, along with processes of how we're evaluating who we're taking in and not. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I went through the OCI process, I was really looking for, well, first of all, I had a job. It was a unique experience where I volunteered with Legal Aid going into the OCI process and going into law school, so I wasn't certain that I even wanted to engage in the OCI process because I was very comfortable, happy, was working with great people. Overall, I was encouraged to explore. So when I was encouraged to explore, I really wanted to find a place that I could see myself working, I could see myself fitting in, I could see myself growing in as a professional, and I was very happy during the process to be in a room, or virtual room, I guess, during COVID, that I saw myself in. There were other Black individuals, there was other Black partners, there was other Black associates. The clerks ahead of me was a large cohort that had a lot of Black individuals. Overall, the firm had a lot of diversity, and just kind of settling on a firm, moving into a new experience for myself, I found it very comforting, and just, I could see myself growing there. I can see myself staying there and growing, of course, if they'll have me. And just kind of, I was happy to see that that was part of the process when I've heard so many things about kind of working in a private firm and what that culture can look like, but luckily all my fears were kind of dispelled, which was good, yeah.
It's kind of that balance, I guess, always of like recognizing that those experiences are real and that they come from a history, but then also being kind of comfortable to like make the change from the ground up, as you said, Palami, and I know you've definitely been doing that within your firm culture, as I'm sure the rest of you have, and I know from my own experience, not that it's about me, but at a larger firm in Nova Scotia, I know that, you know, I've benefited from having people like yourselves, even a couple years ahead of me, like paving that path. So thank you for that. And I guess moving away from the more negative kind of stories that are true, but, you know, that we don't always want to dwell on, I was kind of wondering if there was any benefit that you found as having, like, being a Black lawyer practicing in the Atlantic. Like, for example, does the presence of our historic and culturally distinct Black communities in this region, does that add a different perspective to your work or to your practice, and something that you feel you have like a unique opportunity to use? I'll start with Siobhan.
I felt like, especially in law school, I would say you going to Dalhousie at least, you're connected with the community, you meet the individuals, you get to have retreats and conversations with them, and that creates a really good foundation. Going forward, you build off those roots kind of, and I've luckily had really good experiences staying intact with my mentors, and they're very eager to kind of stay involved and wonder how you're doing, which is good. So I've been lucky in that way, but I'd say overall you do kind of hear that Nova Scotia is unique in a sense, and we do have historic roots. There was at one point 90% of all Black Canadians were here, so it's definitely a very historic population as well. But at least speaking to my experience, I found that law school built the roots for me to kind of have those relationships, and people have followed up with me after, which has been excellent, yeah.
I guess my unique experience, not to do with my work because I don't think the Black culture really plays into securities law that much, but since I've now left Atlantic Canada and work in Ontario, I've become a mentor to a lot of law students who are still in Atlantic Canada, and I think because I'm like a big fish in a very little pond. There's not very many Black lawyers, particularly in New Brunswick or in Fredericton. So I've had a lot of people reach out to me about my experience, and I'm able to offer like any words of advice from their course selections to their work experiences. And I think being a Black lawyer from Atlantic Canada has given me that opportunity, which I might not have had if I had started, say, in Ontario, where there are many more Black lawyers.
It's interesting. There's so much that I want to say, so I'm going to try and make it small. I think it's amazing to be working in my community, to walk down the road and be able to call, you know, from a Jones to a Smith to a Beals to a Prevost to whatever, and know the people, know the community. So I love that. That's what warms me. It's funny, yesterday I was working with a client, so the other great thing with working in your communities and having access to them, we have a wealth of knowledge. We have Black excellence all around us. And we often know each other. So, you know, I can call on people, that's one. But seeing the impact of your work is fabulous. So, for example, McGuinness Cooper has this initiative called PADLE, which stands for People of African Descent Legal Services Initiative. And they offer 10 hours of free pro bono service, any legal service that we have to African Nova Scotians, in part because we're recognizing that access to justice is a challenge. So when I get those clients through, I'm able to work directly in my community and see change. But also Nova Scotia, I think, is one of the most progressive provinces. We're backwards in other ways, but we're forward in some. You know, we have the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute that's doing fabulous work. There's ways of which, you know, our firms can partner. We have the Land Titles Initiative. The Land Titles Initiative changed, like from community pushing and galvanizing and agitating for change. There's a new act that addresses this systemic racism that we have all spoke about. So for me, I love it. And I love working from home too. I got a contract, for example, the other day in Toronto. Not Toronto money, but, you know, but I got the contract from here, right? And it's still working with Black people. So I think that, you know, now that we're working from home, you can still live here and be here and practice and still take work from all over and love your people.
Well, I guess you and Amaki both share that, and that you're doing, you know, work from different parts of the Atlantic, between Ontario, Atlantic, etc. So happy to hear that there are, you know, some positives, some upsides to this, because we don't always want to focus on the downsides, because we know there is joy in this community. So moving into some more specific questions, maybe starting again with our lawyer-to-be, Javon. So you're currently completing your articling year here in Halifax, and I know that you did interview with different firms, that you were sought after, and so how did you make that final choice for your articling summer student experience, and do you have any tips for law students who are trying to make that choice in terms of the culture they're hoping to integrate?
For sure. So like I said, I worked at Legal Aid in the past, and I was hesitant to leave. So when I made the determination that I was going to leave, I was really looking for a place that I could fit in and grow. And just kind of going through the OCI process, you have the opportunity to meet with different firms, meet with different people, just have general conversations and see where you'd fit best. And some of them are very unique. I remember one, I was interviewing with a boutique firm, and they were like, you know, some people just like have a bigger firm mentality. And I was like, kind of like, okay. Like, I was like, maybe this won't work out. But like at that point, like, you know, like you really settle into the spot that you're supposed to be during the OCI process. And either like, if it doesn't work there, later in your career, when you go in to find your articling. And I would say for the students that are going through the process themselves, just look for the place that you feel like you'd fit in the best, that you would be able to grow, the place that has the area of law you'd like to practice. I love criminal law, but I realized that I didn't really want to practice it myself. It's more of a volunteer endeavor and community advocacy on the side for myself. So then I decided I had to find the law that I do want to practice in the future. And in doing so, I definitely just settled into the place that I felt most comfortable. And I'd say for other students going through the process, look for a place that you'll feel comfortable, and that takes away one of the stressors at least.
Thank you for that. I think that'll be insightful for people who are in this very stressful process or looking to do that very stressful recruitment process. Moving to Maki. So as you said, you did article in the Atlantic at a firm here in New Brunswick. And then you chose to continue your practice in Ontario. And I also noted that you made the change from private practice to a more public institution, the Securities Commission in Ontario. And so have you had different experiences since making those changes, both between the places and between the type of work and the type of institution?
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that stands out the most between the jurisdictions is the amount of diversity that there is. Working in a place where you aren't the only Black person has been very nice. And even when I was interviewed at the OSC, there was actually a Black woman on my second interview panel, which I had not experienced before. That was the first time I've been interviewed by someone who wasn't white, actually. So that was very nice, and yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't realize how much I appreciated that. And then in terms of the practice areas, I find I do like the government more. Private practice, I definitely don't miss the billable hours. And I think also the sense of community is a bit more I've experienced in government as well. So I'm part of the Black employee network that we have, and I found even though firms try to say they want to have something like that at their firm, I find there's a sense of busyness and it never really comes to fruition, whereas I've experienced at the OSC that they take time and they really want to establish groups of diverse people where you can have conversations and make some change in your department or at the OSC in general. So I've definitely appreciated that as well between the jurisdictions and between private and government practice.
So a lot to consider there for people. Don't want to put you on the spot as someone who fled when the Atlantic. You're still working hybrid in New Brunswick, but it's just, yeah, you have to follow your passions, I guess, either way. And then a last sort of personalized question for Falami. So obviously you had your vibrant career prior to law school, working in the community and midwifery, and then you have, all your own personal accomplishments, but of course you also have a strong African Nova Scotian heritage, and your father, Rocky Jones, had an important legal legacy as well, and legacy within the community. And so with all of that in mind, how do you kind of balance the potential pressures that can come from that with pursuing your own personal goals and just finding balance within that, if that makes sense?
It does. Thank you for that. It's a hard one. It's interesting. I've often thought about, or people ask me, why law? Like, what happened? And when I think back to that same work that you talked about, that meaningful work, it was always somehow driven around justice. So whether it's women's rights, whether at some point it was, looking at anti-Black racism in the workplace, but it's always been around justice. And when I was at DAL, I remember sitting with Michelle Williams, who is our director, and feeling a little guilty about wanting to do corporate. And I remember sitting with her because everybody's like, oh, you're going to follow your father's footsteps. And for anybody that doesn't know, my dad was, a criminal lawyer, very known for his justice work. But I liked, at the end of my articling year, I really enjoyed wills and estates, and I loved it. And so McGinnis Cooper's also corporate. And I remember on their interview, they were like, but this isn't a social justice firm, just so you know. And my answer to them was, you can make change from inside out. And so I can say this. Does that weigh on me sometimes in terms of, big, huge, gigantic footsteps to follow? 100%. But change, the way that we evoke change, looks different for everyone, and I'm a woman. And so I arrive in that space as a Black woman, and my father did great work, but he was a man. And so I think I bring a different perspective in terms of, you know, my feminist lens, my womanist lens. I think that corporate worlds, we've all been sort of talking about the change that's happening, but it takes us to be there in those seats to make that change. And for community, for example, if they do want to buy a business or they need help with incorporations or securities, or how about get a will, they can find people like us, and you can still do that community activism that you talked about. But yeah, so you know, that's how I reconcile, is understanding how change looks and works, and you know, everybody has their role. So yeah.
I think that's really reassuring, because I think a lot of us, especially people who would, you know, be coming to the conference and who are involved in our Black Law Students Association chapters, kind of have that fear of selling out or being perceived to sell out, basically. But I think you raise an important point, and I think you've all kind of made this in your own way, that ultimately you have to find where you're comfortable and find the ways that you can kind of make change, even if it's just by being there and taking up space and representing. So thank you for that.